everybody, and welcome to today's webinar that I'll be hosting. As Arlene says, I'm part of the leadership team here at UCD Professional Academy, and I also co-authored this report into Ireland's workforce upskill challenges. Now, I will say I have a cold, so if I need to take water breaks, just bear with me. So I'm just going to talk you through the key areas of our focus today. So we've got 4 areas we're going to cover. The first, I'm going to contextualize this upskilling challenge in a global setting. It's not just something that occurs in Ireland, it's something that we experience through economies throughout the world. Secondly, we'll look into the research and look around sort of the appetite and motivation, particularly amongst the Irish workforce, to pursue lifelong learning and upskilling, and then go on to the barriers and the reasons that they don't engage. And then finally, I'll round it off talking about the opportunities that upskilling can afford us as businesses. So this piece of research that we've conducted, we did it looking overall at upskilling, but today I'm going to be talking about it mainly through the lens of employment and what, as employers and educators, we can do to support the workforce. So as I said, I'm going to first sort of scene set a little bit about the challenge globally. So one of the key stats that always stood out to me was the World Economic Forum said that 50% of employees will need reskilling by 2025. That's like 2 years away. And we find ourselves as employers, as educators, in a place of unprecedented change in the speed and rapidity of change within workforce upskilling. So I read somewhere recently that staff turnover in Ireland had doubled between 2020 and 2021. So pre-pandemic, we were already going through this digital revolution. The skills we required were being shifted by technology. Then we hit the pandemic, which turned everything on its head. After the pandemic, you had this great resignation, and how were L&D professionals going to cope with trying to retain staff? And now we're facing into a global recession. It's all the recent tech layoffs. So there's a huge amount of change that's sort of bombarding us as people who are interested in upskilling workforces and maintaining consistency in workforces. Some more stats here, but one that stood out to me was the PwC annual CEO survey. And 3/4 of CEOs said that finding the right skills was a real threat to their business. For anybody who's read this year's IDA report, annual report, you'll see in the executive summary right at the top that that the IDA is saying that skills and talent is at the top of the agenda of their client companies when deciding which countries to invest in, where to put their businesses. So, you know, consistently upskilling a workforce is a global issue. Economies all over the world face this. And today we're going to talk about how it impacts Ireland and what we can do as businesses to remain competitive. So I'm going to present our research findings, but first I want to contextualize a little bit about what the research was and why we as UCD Professional Academy undertook it. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us as a business, we were set up by UCD about 3 years ago to kind of extend further their field into lifelong learning. In those 3 years, we've enrolled 19,000 of Ireland's working professionals onto upskilling courses. We cover like 40 different professional disciplines. By the end of this financial year, that'll be 60. So when you consider the rapid rise of a business like ours, it really illustrates how much demand there is in the marketplace for this kind of learning, which is all about sort of short, applied, industry-led learning that gets you over an upskilling hump. So I wanted to sort of explain, well, that's why we have skin in the game in the upskilling arena. And as part of that, we wanted to think, well, we know what our imperatives are, but what are the issues facing learners, facing the workforce? What are the barriers? Why don't they engage? And what motivates them to engage? What's our place in that? And how can research like this be shared to help not only ourselves, but businesses, government, really understand how do we keep Ireland and its workforce competitive? So the first slide I have is really good news. This is all around the appetite for upskilling. And the good news is that, that Ireland's workforce is really committed to learning. Compared to European averages, we over-index on learning and our commitment to lifelong learning. I read an OECD report recently that showed that actually Ireland's workforce is generally overqualified, but the issue is the areas in which we're qualified is mismatched to the skills we need to do our jobs today, which is where lifelong learning comes in, right? You've understood the core tenets of education and the principles of learning, and now you need to bolt on to that skill set throughout your career with new skills to keep you current. The research we did shows that 63% of Irish workers have engaged in professional upskilling since they left education, and that 1 in 4 of them claims to have signed up to study or is about to close on signing up to study in the next year, which all sounds really positive, right? We're a nation that believes in lifelong learning, that believes in the benefits of upskilling ourselves. A quarter of us are going to do it in the next year. But just to contextualize it, the EU's lifelong learning ambition target is to have 60% of us engaged in learning every year by 2030. So there's still quite a ways to go. My next slide. Okay. Oh, skipped. Okay. So I want to talk now about the reasons people upskill. And this research actually comes from our own research aligned to the national research. So from our own research, we ask our students, what was the reason they took a course? We've consistently asked it since we were in business. And consistently for the 3 years that we've asked this, career advancement, bettering their skill set and bolstering their CV are the reasons that a learner wishes to undergo upskilling. If you look further down the list, you can see only about 1/3 of people say it's about salary potential, which is quite interesting. And only 1 in 10 think they need to train now for the skills they need in their job today. So what that tells us as employers and educators is that workers are being really clear in their objectives. They know why they want to engage in upskilling. They have a real vision for their future career and they have commitment towards their career. So the takeaway for us from an employment perspective is that when we're looking at training offerings, we have to align the learning we're offering, the training we're offering, to career developmental maps to engage that worker. So there's no point offering training for training's sake. You have to think, okay, they have a career pathway in mind. How do we as an employer and them, sort of how do we co-invest in that to build their skills that support them and support us? The number one reason people leave their roles is because they didn't see the growth potential. It's not about salary. And so you have to continually engage them and work with them on that growth. I'm now going to look at the areas people want to upskill in. So we asked people on the nationally representative research what the subject areas they were most interested in. Now, it's nationally representative. It's really interesting that healthcare comes near the top of it, but I'm going to look at those sort of cross-discipline skills, the ones that apply in multiple verticals here. So we can see at the top, we've got IT, computer science, business and finance, really core, clear skills that operate across the workforce. You have to go a long way down to find data analytics, which I think is kind of interesting because it's an area where there are so many vacancies. And then you get the leadership and management piece sat around the middle. You can compare this to a list the World Economic Forum put out of the top 10 skills that we'll require in the workforce in 2025. And of those top 10, 5 were around critical thinking and problem solving, 3 were around sort of people skills and soft skills, and only 2 were technical skills based. And what we need to look at then is say, well, the skills needed per role in our organization are broadening. That it's not a question of, 2-3 decades ago, we had quite a narrow focus. This is your spec. This is what you offer the organization. If you are skilled in that area, life continues as normal. The rate of technological development, the rate of changing requirements and agility in the workforce means that we need to make sure our workers are skilled across a real range of disciplines and that those are quite transferable skills, not just role-specific skills. And when we look at sort of the uncertain economic climate we're facing into from an employer perspective, having that agility in our workforce is key, allowing individuals to pivot and move where we require them within an organizational focus is really helpful. And if you just stuck to discipline-specific skills, that wouldn't be possible. So I've sort of talked around the opportunity and why people wish to engage in upskilling. And I'm just going to go into a little bit now around the barriers people have towards upskilling. I'll set the scene a little bit by talking about our student profile. So the average UCD Professional Academy learner would be aged 25 to 44-ish. They typically have 7 years work experience, if more likely 10. So they're a decent way into their career. Typically, they're educated to third level. So when you sort of put those age and profiles together, you kind of get a learner somewhere between 30 and 50 years old. That's a really, really pressurized life stage. There's a huge amount of competing demands on people's time and money. There's also a lot of career pressure. People are growing in their roles at that time. And so when we talk about barriers to upskilling, we have to do it in the context of understanding that learner has a lot of competing pressures, not just the upskilling pressure. And now we're coming along and saying to them, and we also want you to advance, we want you to thrive. And they have a lot of other things to consider in that. I talk about surveying our students. We also survey people who engaged with us, inquired with us, and didn't buy, because we want to know why they didn't. What was the barrier for them? 85% of people who inquire but don't study with us don't go elsewhere. It's not that they chose another provider. Their reasoning is all around life input, either a financial situation, a job situation, a family situation, just made it untenable in the here and now. And I think we have to really understand that context for a learner, that there's so many competing pressures today on their time. So unsurprisingly, the biggest barrier is cost when you talk about a sort of a nationally representative sample, which makes sense. We're in a cost of living crisis. 40% of people pay for their own upskilling, and about 40% are either fully or partially funded by their employer. So when we put that through the lens of training requirements for 2023, I think you could say, well, if we invested more in our workforce, if we increased our contribution to that, yes, you engender loyalty and all the benefits of that, but you also get the benefit of productivity. We survey our corporate customer base annually as well. And when we surveyed them a year ago and asked them, what was their motivation for upskilling their workforce, most of the responses coalesced around this idea of attracting key talent, retaining key talent. Employment was high. They were losing talented individuals to competitors, and they wanted to use training as a way to sort of cement their investment and keep people loyal to them. This year, all of that is still true. That still exists, but there's now a real sense of also, as we face into sort of more turbulent economic times, is right-sizing that workforce and saying, well, I'm probably not going on a big hiring drive at this point in time. So of the workforce I've got, and possibly shifting business priorities I've got as I pivot to navigate what's ahead, I need them to have really flexible skills where I can adjust their focus and make it really work for me as an organization, that the workforce is aligned to my business goals, and there's that flexibility and agility in it. There was this Deloitte study, it was a human trends capital study, and it said that 72% of executives ranked the ability of their people to adapt, reskill, and assume new roles as the most important, or the second most important thing for navigating the disruption ahead. And I thought that was really key, that it's about being able to flex into your workforce and for them to flex with you. So when we talk about cost, perhaps greater investment in upskilling, actually, the investment will pay off in quite short terms. So hang on, I think I skipped a slide here. Yeah. So after affordability, and that is key right now, particularly cost of living, there are two key areas that really stand out as barriers, and that's inertia and inconvenience. So I want to focus on the inertia piece, first of all. So the reasons 2 and 3 on a national survey that people answered as to why they weren't undergoing upskilling. One was, I've just never considered it or thought about it. And the other was, I don't need to do any courses. I don't need new training for my work. which is interesting because I think we're pretty aligned in the idea that everybody needs to flex that muscle to continue to be relevant within their workspace, sort of now and into the future. So perhaps the takeaway here then is to understand that we need to get better at communicating the value of upskilling, that if it isn't on people's minds, perhaps it should be. We know at a macro level, we can talk here and say, well, we know that if you encourage somebody to upskill, it benefits them as an individual, it benefits the company financially, and it benefits the economy. It benefits us at a national level, on a macro level. But we need to take it back down to a micro level and say, well, what is the benefit for the individual? And are we missing the communication of that? Are we not explaining clearly how upskilling supports them and not just something that that we want them to do for the company? There's an element of reassurance there that engaging and making it relevant and accessible will help them overcome that sort of inertia. I will just point out here, number 4, we first asked it this year, so it wasn't on the survey for last year, but it jumped straight into position number 4. It's not convenient for me to take on a course right now. And that links me to my next slide, which is all about convenience and when people want to study. We ask our students what was their main reason for choosing us as opposed to another training provider. And with my marketing hat on, I always assume the answer will have something to do with brand because of UCD's Quality Trust brand mark within Ireland. And I think that would be a leading reason. But consistently, the top 3 reasons are the course length fit my needs, the convenience of the delivery times, and the quality and relevance of the content. Now, to take the first one, the course length fit my needs, that's really interesting when you're talking about people with busy lives. Our training is typically about 36 hours in length, and it runs usually, there's different modalities, but most people opt to do it part-time, and it takes them 3 months. So, 3 months it's a realistic commitment. You're like, okay, I can do this for the next 3 months, because it is a commitment. You're studying in your evenings, there are additional assignments. So you have to be invested in this. When you look at sort of convenience of delivery times, that's really interesting. It speaks to this slide, that the most popular delivery time is part-time on a weekday evening. And the second most popular delivery time is part-time on a weekday in the daytime. Actually, on the strength of this research, we've just started offering part-time daytime programs to students. We'll offer them from January. And so we started promoting that now. And the response is enormous. So it just goes to show that different people have different requirements for study. But you get down into quite small numbers when you look at sort of full-time chunks. And put in mind, again, that working professional, it's hard to carve out a week of your time to take that break from either your work, from your family commitments. It's really hard. So we have to marry this in. I'm just going to jump up to a slide I showed before. Back up here, talking about cost. Yeah, we established that cost is the biggest barrier. But right here at number 2 is the course not being available at a convenient time is the second most. And that's 4 out of 10 people have that problem. So it's really important that when we think about engaging people with study, we understand the time pressures they're under. I was at an OECD workshop recently, and they had a graph there that showed that the number 1 obstacle for adults to engage with adult education is family reasons. And you think, yeah, people have competing commitments. So the takeaway for us as employers and educators is making learning accessible on a timeline that suits people. So what you learn is important, and that's sort of a given, but when you learn is just as important. You could offer the most amazing course out there, and you put it on at a time that isn't convenient to people, and they won't stick with it. Moving on from the convenient times, I want to just chat briefly about modality, because it's really shifted with the pandemic. So when we asked people how they wanted to study a year ago, bearing in mind a year ago we were still in lockdowns and pandemic times, 20% of people wanted to get back to a classroom. There was still this idea that we would go back to how we were before. And this year that's reduced right down here to 12%. 88% of people we asked wanted to study online, one form or another. And I think we should acknowledge that shift with the pandemic, that now all of our business interactions, our learning, so much of our life is engaged through a screen. It's become second nature. And of those 88%, it's quite interesting to see that there's about a third split between people who want fully on demand. So that's totally flexible. You pick up and put down the learning at times that suit you. and about a third want live online. So the reassurance of having that live lecturer and that live learning experience, but not having to leave their home. And then there's a third who wants sort of a hybrid environment. But once again, it just points us back towards the idea that convenience and flexibility is really, really key for this audience. And then my final data slide here is, I said I would talk about the opportunity of upskilling. And it's quite interesting. I said earlier in the presentation, 63% of people have undertaken a short course since completing their education. Of those, of the people that undertook a course, 73% are considering further study in the next year, compared to sort of national average of about 25%. So what this tells us is once they have flexed that muscle, once they've engaged in upskilling, people are really, really keen to go again. You've bridged that barrier and you've overcome either that inertia, perhaps underconfidence. We see a lot of that with first time sort of return to study people is the idea of, well, can I manage this? Will I fit it in? Will I be good enough? So you need to overcome those barriers. And once you do, people revisit their learning again and again. We go back to our students 6 months after they've studied with us and ask them what the impact of the study was, how it's helped their careers. And in that survey, 9 out of 10 people say they're interested in studying again now. So that's 6 months on from study. It just shows you that that people, once they've got the bug, they really do see the value and they come back to it again and again. You need to build that habit and enhance the value to them. You know it'll value and benefit them, enhance the value to the company, and of course, Island Inc. in the economy. So that's the end of my data slides. I'm going to leave you with 3 key takeaways for 2023 and how you can use this knowledge that we have about upskilling to inform how you get people to commit to training in 2023 within your organizations. My first takeaway is all around convenience, that the appetite for upskilling amongst Irish workers is really, really high, but you have to meet them on their terms. You have to consider when they're going to study, how they're going to study, and the length you're asking them to study for. Is it realistic? Can they fit it in? The second thing is all around relevance. So you can offer training, you can offer great sways and broad aspects of training, but if it's not meaningful and it's not relevant to their role and their career trajectory and your business application, then it's rather irrelevant. It has to fit with both their role development and the business development. And then the final thing is all around that opportunity, is that to make it happen, to get people engaged, you have to reassure them. You have to get them over that initial hump, get them engaged, and in turn, they'll reward you with productivity, with loyalty, and most importantly right now in business and looking at 2023, with agility in their role. So that's a summary of the research we've done. I'm going to hand you back to Arlene to see if we have any questions about the presentation or anything else associated with upskilling.
Thanks, Rachel. That was a great insight into the research that was conducted. Thank you very much for that. I am going to delve into some Q&As. Just to let everybody know, we do have a Q&A chat box on screen if you want to type in any questions that you have after that. Just a couple to start us off that we had come in throughout. There was one question around, what if I invest heavily in my staff, make them better professionals, and then they leave? So probably something to your point around resignation and kind of going to that competitive space.
Yeah, do you know what, I heard that asked recently, and the answer that was given stuck with me, which is, what if you don't? So if you don't invest in your staff, if you don't help them upskill, their loyalty towards you, then, you know, go back to that point I made that that the number one reason people leave their roles is lack of growth, that they see a ceiling in the role. So if you're not working with them on it, you're going to lose them anyway. Far better that you show them that their career trajectory can exist within your organization. We know from countless studies how much more cost effective it is to retain talented staff than it is to replace them with new.
Thank you for that. We had another question in around engagement and study. So what about staff groups who don't want to engage in study? How do I engage them? Not everyone wants to commit their time to upskilling.
Yep, that's absolutely true. Not everybody does. I would say universally, by and large, people require fulfillment and purpose in their jobs to be happy. So if they don't engage with upskilling, they run the risk of falling behind. Now, there's definitely cohorts of people out there that don't require that to keep current, and perhaps their role doesn't require it. It's a really static role. And if they're happy and you're happy, brilliant, more power to you both. If they need to upskill to remain current in their role and remain current with the business needs, then I think over time they will feel less fulfilled and they will feel a lower sense of purpose. And so the idea of engaging with upskilling should become more valuable to them personally. Underneath that, I guess you need to understand what their reticence is. What's the barrier they're experiencing? Why don't they wish to engage? I would say upskilling is a really broad church. There's lots of ways people can engage in upskilling. It doesn't have to be through formal education and certification. There's on-the-job training, there's mentorship, there's apprenticeship. There's lots of different ways you can encourage people to continue to flex their learning and remain fulfilled and valuable to themselves and their career, as well as you as an organization.
Thank you. And we did just get a question in, can we get these slides sent out to our email address afterwards? Yes, we'll send a copy of this recording and a copy of the full research report as well, for you to share internally as well.
There's a fair bit more data in the research report, so it's worth looking through it. I just didn't feel it was particularly spot on for today's topic of looking at it through sort of 2023 skills planning, but there's loads of really interesting areas to delve into as well.
We did have another question, reasons for taking a course. This seems to be missing a question around how many were asked or made to take a course by their employer. It can disguise the interest levels as an unfortunate fact of life. Did the study try to capture this in any way? So those who might have been required to take a course by their employer, do you have any information on that or input?
Not from this study, but we do ask our students if they're required to take CPD as part of their role. And the majority of people aren't required to take CPD, but did choose to engage with upskilling. So I think in those terms, yeah, there are roles that require upskilling. I would say from an employment perspective, like you can lead a horse to water, but if you're not meeting the learner on their terms and fitting around their needs, your learning outcomes and embedding those learning outcomes, you know, the virtuous circle of that then providing relevance and application in their role. If you haven't engaged with them correctly on what they want to learn and how they want to learn, you're probably not going to reap the benefits of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. There was a question around, is the public sector slower to flex around their kind of upskilling needs? Would they be kind of slower to come to the fore around upskilling?
Say not. The public sector, I mean, we do a lot of engagement within public sector areas through our various teams within Professional Academy, and in my experience, no. The public sector knows the value of its workforce. I'd venture, I don't have stats to back this up, but I'd venture staff turnover is possibly lower in the public sector, and therefore upskilling and engaging the workforce you have is really, really important. And there's a real sense of understanding within budgetary constraints that upskilling can really advance your workforce and make your ambitions and your goals, your business ambitions, work for you.
This is just a kind of follow-on question, and you probably touched on it briefly in the fieldwork section of this presentation. Is your research a mix of public and private sector employers?
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So the external research is naturally representative. It's nothing to do with our own customer bases. So yeah, that covers all walks of life. And then from the research I've cited that is ours, our customer base, across both of sort of, we have divisions that service individual learners and then divisions that work with corporate teams of learners. And in both situations where we're surveying those bases, it's both public and private sector and third sector.
Brilliant. And we did have a question in that one of our team members already answered, but just for anybody who missed it, what was the most popular course attended over the last 3 years? So our team member Rebecca has already answered that, to say that we'd have a lot of popularity around leadership and management, project management, HR management. We do have a full suite of our courses available on ucd.ie/professional academy, and you can download a brochure as well if you want to have a look at the courses there as well.
And I'd add, talking about course popularity, it takes me back to that point about that World Economic Forum study about the skills for tomorrow, that we probably have quite a number and an increasing number of quite technical courses, so into the areas of data analytics and coding, and they're absolutely essential employment skills to certain roles. But the reason the most popular courses are cross-functional is that people need those soft skills and those critical thinking skills in a really wide range of roles these days.
We had a question around learning champions. So are learning champions a good idea? So colleagues sharing their experience internally with other employees.
I love that idea. Yeah, I think those internal flexes, so champions, mentorship, learning sharing is really, really important. I'll give you an example. Internally, we have one person dedicated to our CRM system, which is HubSpot. What she doesn't know about HubSpot isn't worth knowing. Different parts of the organization need to know different areas of that. So rather than each of us going off and doing our individual training, she's an excellent central point to share learning cross-divisionally about the areas that are most relevant to us. So I think it really, really does work.
There was one more question in just around the barriers to participation. So another thing that wasn't touched on in this session, but very relevant all the same, the ecosystem and skills supply offering is very diffuse and complex. There's difficulty finding the right course is coming up as an identified barrier elsewhere. So many start looking, but many give up their search too early. Did that issue come up in this study?
I think that might speak to the inertia element in this study. I would say when we survey people who studied with us and people who chose not to, and we go on and ask them, who else did you look at or who did you end up choosing? The response range is so broad. It really is quite a fragmented area. And I talked about upskilling being quite a broad church. There's loads and loads of different providers. Part of that is great because there's so much choice out there and you can really dive into the areas that suit you. But I do understand it makes it hard to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. I think when you are looking and researching, you should consider word of mouth. What have your colleagues studied that they really benefited from? Do you have preferred suppliers through your employer? What's the reputation of the company you're looking to engage with, study, and do they fit your needs? I think the key thing that came out of this research is all around how we have to meet learners on their needs. So yeah, there might be myriad options, but look for the ones that you think you're going to stick to, that you can engage with the learning and see it through.
Yeah. There was a question just around our own modalities. Would you support an organization with bespoke courses to meet organizational needs and requirements? A member of our team has already written in there, but yes, we do have a variety of corporate training initiatives available, and that does include bespoke and custom courses, whereby our team will work with you in terms of your own needs for your organization as well, just in case anybody missed that question and would like to know. That leads into a separate question that was given as well. I don't have budget to offer training across the organization. How do I prioritize my training budget for 2023?
Okay, so I would prioritize my training budget around the intersection between my staff development program and my business goals. So look at where those 2 points meet and place the majority of your budget there. Saying that, when you say you don't have budget to offer training across the organization, do look at funding sources. You can work, there's a national training fund that the government supplies. A really strong way of accessing that is through skills nets. They're a great way of helping you reach affordable training solutions and helping you with that cost of training across your organization. a final thought, I guess, is if there's expensive courses that a specific employee is really keen to do, you could open a dialogue with them about co-funding solutions if you don't feel you could reach to the whole amount.
That's brilliant. We did have an additional question in. Have you had any research on or have any observations on retention or recruitment for data analytical skills?
We have data around the amount of people wishing to study data analytics with us. I mean, when we look to go into new course areas, when we look to build a course, obviously there's an investment in building a new program. And so we research how much appetite there is for that in the marketplace. And there's a massive amount. And if you look at any sort of salary studies and job vacancy studies out there, data analytics comes up all the time. It's a really in-demand skill, and a bit like digital marketing of 20 years ago, because it's quite a new skill. You don't have the latent supply of people who are already sort of trained in that area. And so it's quite a new skill with not as many trained professionals as there are vacancies at this time.
Brilliant. There's just one final question. If anybody does have any last questions, please let us know. And if not, we can end up on these last few. With the rapid change in digital technologies, how can you predict what skills your workforce will need to support your future business goals?
Yeah, I think we all get a bit spooked by changing technology, that we think of AI and machine learning, and we think of people losing their jobs to robots. I would say there is such a requirement for critical business thinking skills, for problem solving skills, for people managers, that actually I don't think that the change in digital technology changes those requirements. When you talk about digital specific skills, so perhaps a specific technology, I would say once people have learned how to study one thing within that realm, they will be far better poised to go on and study a new technology. So if you think about the development of new types of code, for example, if somebody's gone to the trouble of learning a coding language, learning the next coding language is significantly easier. If you, think about verbal languages, linguists are typically very good at picking up other languages. So it's not a wasted investment in yourself to train in a technology that becomes obsolete. A lot of the learning that you've applied to that technology will be relevant to the next technology for your role.
That's brilliant. A kind of spearheaded question from this. Any advice on designing learning pathways?
It's interesting. We're looking at that at the moment. We decided to run some of our own data analytics and say, okay, well, a number of our alumni come back to us and study again. And as we mature as an organization, the more times alumni come back to us and take additional courses. We're like, it'd be really interesting to know which courses typically lead on to which courses. And there's a really logical vertical spread. So if you take data analytics, somebody might start on introduction to Python and then go on to introduction to data analytics and then go on to specialist courses. That all makes sense. But when you talk about cross-discipline courses, actually people jump around a lot. And I think that speaks to probably the fact that we have a lot of the breadth of requirement in most people's role these days is quite significant. So if I take my role, my vertical skill set is all in marketing, but I need leadership skills, I need project management skills, I need more analytical skills than I ever did, I need more digital skills than I ever did. And so there isn't necessarily a sort of a hard and fast sequence to the types of skills you learn. I would say when you're looking at mapping career pathways and skills pathways, I would really engage with the individual. In the UCD Professional Academy, we run PDR programs, personal development review programs, which we check in quarterly. And it's like, well, this is the direction this individual is headed. This is the direction as a business we need the role to head. Where does that coalesce? And what training requirements do they have? So I would use that as kind of your guiding light for a career pathway, rather than, which would be lovely if it existed, but it just doesn't, because the world's too nuanced, a really sort of linear, you go from this course to this course to this course in your career.
That's brilliant. I think that is all of our Q&A done. So on that note, I will conclude the session and thank everybody so much for joining us for this session. You can expect a copy of the recording in your inbox in the coming days. And as mentioned, we will send a copy of the full report over as well. In the meantime, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our team at professional.academy@ecd.ie and we'll be delighted to help. Thank you all so much for your time today and have a lovely rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.